Hey friend, managing anxiety symptoms is not the same as addressing the root cause of your anxiety. What do we mean when we talk about this hamster wheel? It's like a continuous, ongoing game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
If all we do is address the symptoms, we fall short. Breathing exercises, medication, exercise, all of these things are really great tools for managing symptoms, but none of them address the cause of your anxiety.
When you actually have regulated your nervous system after your nervous system has been so dysregulated, it's like, I'm finally peaceful. I am finally in a state where I can function and I have things I need to do. I have responsibilities that I feel like a failure because I've been too dysregulated to manage. I know I probably should think about what got me here in the first place, but I don't want to right now. But friend, that's not going to move us out of the hamster wheel.
But good news, there is a pathway to get there, and that's what we're going to unpack today. If you want to learn how to address the cause of your anxiety so you can get off of the managing symptoms hamster wheel, this episode's for you. Welcome, and thank you for being here. I'm Josh Spurlock. I'm a licensed professional counselor with a degree in biblical languages. I also developed a model of therapy called Neuroscience-Informed Christian Counseling and founded the faith-based therapy company, My Counselor Online. Every month, my team and I help thousands of people mature into their true self and experience true happiness. We have a 93% success rate and 4.8 stars on Trustpilot. It just works. And in this podcast, we share the secrets we've learned to true happiness, the abundant life that Jesus spoke of in John 10:10. So thanks for joining us. Let's learn something together. Hey friend, in this episode, we're going to be diving in and unpacking kind of what is the hamster wheel of symptom management. Like if you experience anxiety, you are very much aware of what this is like, but we're just going to unpack it in detail so we can understand the difference between the hamster wheel of symptom management and what are the root causes. And then we're going to dive into what can we do about the root causes? How can we actually bring healing and transformation that doesn't just kind of mask or make manageable and livable or intolerable the anxiety, but actually bring healing and transformation to it. So I'm joined here by my lovely co-host, Cassie Spurlock, and let's dive in. So I want to start by looking at a Bible verse here. Right?
Sounds like a good place to start.
Yeah,
Like to start there.
1 Peter 5:7. It's a popular verse around anxiety and around worry. And it has this beautiful invitation from the Lord in it. It says, give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about what happens to you. Give all of your worries and cares to God, for he cares about what happens to you. And we talked in our previous episode about this invitation from the Lord, where he says, fear not, for I am with you. Fear not, for I am with you. And the enemy likes to twist scripture in a way that turns it into a weapon against us. And so he likes to take verses like this one in 1 Peter, or fear not in Isaiah and elsewhere in scripture, and say, oh, you suck as a Christian, like you're failing spiritually because you have fear or you have worry or you feel anxiety. And unintentionally well-meaning Christians can be a tool of the enemy in bringing shame into believers' lives by offering just kind of, these spiritual bypassing caveats. Well, just give it to God, it'll be okay. And it's the problem with these things are not that they're not true, that there's truth in them. It's that they're incomplete, that they tell us an outcome without giving us the pathway to that outcome. And so then the enemy uses that to create shame for us when we're not just able to give my cares to God and not carry around. Like, I quote that verse,
Yeah.
I pray that verse, I meditate that verse, but I still feel anxious. I still am struggling with worry, like I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm failing God.
Yeah. So I just want to speak to you who's maybe felt that shame where the enemy has used the scriptures as a weapon against you, and maybe through the mouth of well-meaning other Christians, but have left you feeling less than, unworthy, or like a failure, to say, he cares about you. That I am with you isn't about your performance or how well you do this, or that I'm with you if you're able to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah. If you are effectively able to tell me about your anxiety or your stress or your sadness, then I'll show up for you.
Yeah. And what a lot of those well-meaning folks fall short of is they would tell you the outcome without giving you a pathway to get there. And we really want to address that.
Because they don't actually know the pathway to get there.
It's true. It's true. They don't really know the pathway to get there. But good news, there is a pathway to get there. And that's what we're going to unpack today. So what do we mean when we talk about this hamster wheel? Right? If you struggle with anxiety, like, how much it feels like a hamster wheel. Right? Like it's whack-a-mole. You ever played that game at the arcade?
I like the crocodile one where the crocodiles come out and they open their mouth and you bang on them like this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really good at that game.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't even know what to do with you sometimes.
If only it were that easy with our anxiety.
Yeah, right?
Right? Then we could just
We could just
smack it over the
see
head.
what we needed to do. And then eventually, your turn's over and they just stay away.
Yeah. But it's like a continuous, ongoing game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
It's like this continuous, I'm trying to eat right. I'm trying to exercise. I'm trying to pray. I'm trying to meditate. I'm trying my breathing exercises. Like I'm doing all the things, and those things help.
Yes.
Right? They help to a degree because they do help regulate the nervous system.
Right.
All of those activities, even medication, is aimed at regulating the nervous system, which is managing the symptoms of the anxiety. We talked about extensively in the last episode, kind of deep diving in the neuroscience of what's happening in the nervous system. Right? We understand that anxiety is the sympathetic activation of the nervous system. It's this fight or flight response to a threat. It's kind of like a smoke alarm in a house, alerting to something that smells dangerous, either physical danger or emotional danger. The brain doesn't really differentiate between the two, but there's some sort of a threat that then sounds the alarm. And the regulating techniques, the symptom management techniques, are aimed at reducing the uncomfortable symptoms of that sympathetic response.
Right.
And this is really good because we talked about when we get dysregulated, how the front part of our brain goes offline, right? And we run in this kind of survival mode place, and we have limited access to resources that are really helpful for understanding and addressing the cause of our anxiety. But if all we do is address the symptoms, we fall short. It's a problem not because it's not good, it's a problem because it's incomplete.
Yeah, like regulating the nervous system is a necessary first step to being in a spot, being in that green ventral vagal state so that we have the tools we need, the internal resources to go into the next piece, the actual healing piece, so that we can get off the hamster wheel, so we can gain freedom from our anxiety.
Yes. This is why, like, anxiety medications, if you read the scroll of documentation that comes with anxiety medication, it's going to tell you that the medication is designed to be used in conjunction with therapy.
Yeah.
Because the manufacturers of the medication know that the medication doesn't actually cure anxiety, it just manages the symptoms of anxiety. And they want you to lean into doing the work that can actually bring healing and transformation. Now, many people don't read the scroll that comes with it. And a lot of times healthcare providers don't advocate for that treatment recommendation that comes with the medication strongly enough. And so folks can think that the pill is actually the answer to their anxiety.
Yeah.
When really it's just a part of the solution. Now, we're not anti-medication by any means. Like, we're not medication first. I always think that there are other steps that we should try in terms of managing anxiety
in terms of
symptoms.
taking care of our bodies with what we have control over and what are best practices for that.
Right, before we introduce outside chemicals to help in that process. But assuming that we have leaned into the self-care of our body in ways that help mitigate and manage the symptoms of anxiety, when anxiety symptoms are still extreme to a place where we're dysregulated and it's interfering with our ability to function on a day-to-day basis, and it's preventing us from being able to do the work that would allow us to actually heal, medication absolutely has a place. It's absolutely necessary, and it's a godsend.
Yeah, it's a common grace.
It's a common grace. We should understand, if you're not theological, if that's not your background, and then this idea of common grace might be new to you. But theologically, theologians talk about this idea that it rains on the just and the unjust, that God's kindness is shown to all of humankind in lots of different ways. And that kindness of God towards folks, regardless of their relationship with Him, is understood as common grace. That our bodies heal. We have white blood cells that fight off infection, that our bodies are able to, be injured and repair themselves. That this doesn't happen apart from God, but it is a feature that God has wired in that everyone shares in, even if they reject the Creator for whom they come from. Even if they reject the gift giver, there's still a gift there that God has offered us. And that gift is understood theologically as common grace. Right? And so there's a ability to kind of engage medication that by God's grace, people have been able to have wisdom in developing and research and figure out how the body works and create medications that can be extremely helpful in addressing the symptoms around anxiety. And we should do that as a first step, because we need to bring this part of our brain back online. We need to regulate our nervous system inside of what therapists call the window of tolerance. That is the level of distress that we can manage without our brain beginning to shut down in a kind of a trauma type response or dissociative type response. So our ability to stay with our experience and keep our distress level low enough, our dysregulation low enough, or our regulation high enough, depending on how you look at it, that our brain doesn't get overwhelmed, right? Because if our brain gets overwhelmed and we go into this kind of dissociative place or into these different unhealthy coping mechanisms in order to regulate our nervous system, we're not in a nervous system state to be able to actually do the work that brings about healing. That positive neuroplasticity isn't possible in those dysregulated states. And we make all sorts of bad decisions.
Yeah.
We can turn to, say, alcohol in order to mediate or regulate our nervous system. Doom scrolling, we can turn to pornography, we can turn to compulsive eating, we can turn to all sorts of things in desperate attempts to regulate our nervous system. So healthy coping mechanisms that help regulate our nervous system are mucho super beneficial.
Yeah, they're good. They're necessary to get us into a nervous system regulated state so that we can move to the next step.
Yeah. So we don't want to poo-poo on that. Like we're not saying, that those things are bunk and they don't have their place. And
no, they have their place. They are very important.
They're a necessary first step. But what does it mean to not just stop with the first step?
Yeah. To go a little bit deeper, to try to figure out, to get curious, going back to that compassionate curiosity of, so what am I feeling? And when I am quiet with myself and I get curious, what is my body telling me?
Mm-hmm.
What do I feel physically in my body? What are the thoughts that I'm having as I feel these feelings? Yeah, just reaching into that to unlock that next level of information and awareness.
So the trick here is to not just shut down symptoms.
Yeah. And I think it can be so tempting to want to stop there, because when you actually have regulated your nervous system after your nervous system has been so dysregulated, it's like, I'm finally peaceful. I am finally in a state where I can function, and I have things I need to do. I have things I need to get done that I haven't been able to get done. I have responsibilities that I feel like a failure because I've been too dysregulated to manage. And so it can be so tempting to be like, I will put this on the back burner. I know I probably should think about what got me here in the first place, but I don't want to right now. I feel so much pressure to do these other things. But friend, that's not going to move us out of the hamster wheel. Like, we're never getting off the hamster wheel if we don't actually honor those pieces that got us there in the first place. They actually just need a little care. They need a little support. They can thrive and they can heal and they can grow into being what we need so that that anxiety doesn't get tripped anymore, so that our nervous system can stay in that green state.
Yeah. This is, it's counterintuitive because it's not running away from the anxiety. It's actually moving towards it. Regulating our nervous system, regulating the symptoms of that anxiety, but we're not ignoring or trying to just put out of mind or not think about and move past. Like a lot of cognitive approaches to symptom management of anxiety have to do with restructuring our thoughts around our anxiety in a way that helps us get away from it. But again, all that does is in the short term bring relief from symptoms. It doesn't actually lead to resolve. So the counterintuitive thing that we want you to do is to get curious and compassionately move towards your anxiety. That means creating space for it. It means practically sitting down with a notepad or with a trusted friend and getting curious about what it is that I'm feeling and what that anxiety might be telling me, what it might be connected to, what might be underneath that anxiety. Asking questions like, what am I scared of? What am I afraid of? What, is about this situation or circumstances that is sounding the alarm? What's the maybe bad thing that might happen? Right? And when we ask questions of ourselves, that reflective process, we're engaging this front part of our brain to try to connect the dots with what's happening inside our brain in this part. So this part of our brain is asking questions to this part of our brain, and it's connecting dots between the right and left hemisphere and the deeper parts of our limbic system in here that enable us to gain insight and understanding into what it is that we're feeling, which in and of itself doesn't resolve what it is that we're feeling, but it moves us a step closer.
Yeah, it helps us organize it rather than it just feeling ethereal,
Right.
or we just have a lot of bad feelings, but we don't have a sense for how they fit together or what's going on with them or maybe what they are. And so this is a first step that, like if you've ever felt like something was really stressful and you're feeling overwhelmed by a lot of things, you brain dump. That's like a common word probably these days, but I remember the first time I heard the concept, it was like, just get it on paper, just write it out, and then you will be able to see what it is. And so you can have some clarity about it. And that's kind of how I think about like this organizing of what's going on. Your brain is, it's pinging it through those little pipes, and then it can come out like, oh, it's this.
Yeah, under conditions of safety, that is where we've regulated our nervous system with cues of safety, so we can feel like we're reasonably okay. It doesn't mean the anxiety is gone. It's just regulated to a tolerable place, and there's a sense of safety. We can engage with curiosity, and our nervous system will actually bring forward the thing that is prompting the anxiety. That God designed our nervous system to want to heal. Our nervous system is not neutral, and God is not neutral. We just read in 1 Peter that he wants us to bring to him, not to ignore our worries, not to ignore our concerns. Doesn't even say don't worry and be concerned. Just says bring these things to the Lord because he cares about our experience. And that care extends beyond like a detached kind of out there, but he cares about it in the way he has designed the nervous system to be able to heal. Right? And so the bringing it to him is as a invitation towards healing. Under conditions of safety, regulation, our nervous system actually bring forward the thing that is triggering our anxiety and give us the opportunity to engage experiences that can bring healing and transformation.
And be ready for whatever your nervous system might bring up, because it's often a surprise. Sometimes not. At least speaking from my own experience, it's often a surprise. I'm like, oh, that reminds me of the time that I was 8 years old and such happened. I'm like, what?
Yeah, so let's dive into what are we talking about? What might we find underneath that anxiety? Yeah. If the anxiety is an alarm system because of a perceived threat, right? What might that threat consist of? Sometimes the threat is related to present day circumstances, right? We might hear a rustle in the bushes and we're on a camping trip and think that there's a bear that might be there.
We live in Montana, so that's a real possibility.
It's a real possibility.
Yeah.
Right? And, there you could have anxiety about an upcoming camping trip.
Yes.
Because you've heard, there are bears in the area and there's a alarm that's going off. And underneath that alarm is real fear.
Yeah. A real fear about a potential real threat that you might
real
face.
fear about a real threat. And so the way that we then address the anxiety about the trip is to address the fear that exists underneath that. Why am I anxious about this trip? Because sometimes people can be anxious and they don't realize, why am I so anxious about this upcoming trip?
So much. That's so normal. And I think sometimes we live with such a low buzz of anxiety in our bodies all the time. And we're just not tuned in to oh, I actually feel anxious a lot. And there's a lot of little things that might be triggering that anxiety. And so getting curious about if I get really quiet with my body, do I feel peace? What does my stomach feel like? What does my chest feel like? What does my face feel like? What do my shoulders feel like?
Yeah, what Cassie's describing is the noticing, what we call noticing. We're recognizing, we're reflecting on our own experience in a way that helps us to notice the somatic or body sensations that we're experiencing, and to then be able to name those where we notice it. That's an internal awareness. And then a naming where we put language, right? So the internal awareness component is a right brain experience connecting with our limbic system. And then over here on the left frontal lobe is where language exists. And we're connecting then language to what we've noticed, which in and of itself helps regulate the brain. But it also helps us gain insight into kind of what's going on. If we keep following the feelings, we'll move from noticing the body sensations to identifying the fear that's underneath that. We're like, oh, I think I'm anxious about this trip because I'm afraid of getting eaten by a bear.
Yeah.
Which is a legitimate fear.
Yeah.
Right? There are bears. People get eaten by them. Or they get mauled at least.
I know, I'm like,
Not a whole lot of people getting fully eaten, but they're getting mauled by bears, right? And we want to listen to that because, like we talked about in our previous episode, our emotion system is a gift from the Lord. It's a dashboard. Our body is alerting us to potential threats with fear.
Yes.
In particular, right? Fear alerts us to a threat and it motivates us to take protective action to move away from that fear. And so what might that look like, right? In this situation, it might mean going and getting bear spray. It might be educating yourself around, what bear threats are, what to do in the event of seeing a bear, how to, put your food into canisters that seal it up and keep it safe. There's action steps that are actually really wise things to do and to address that fear. And so when we take then action to address the threat, it relieves the fear and the anxiety associated with that fear goes away. See that? It's not just managing the anxiety where I could just, have a drink or something to manage this anxiety.
Because you are still afraid of the bear situation. You just don't know that you're afraid of the bear situation. And you haven't dug in a way that allows you to do something to
address that fear.
Yeah, to make it a difference in how you will continue to feel about it moving forward.
Yeah, so you could avoid the trip. And that could help manage your anxiety, right? And make the anxiety go away. You could go for a run that would deplete the cortisol levels in your blood system and relieve muscle tension and help manage some of the symptoms, and you'd feel less anxious and that you'd feel better in that. You could distract yourself from thinking about the upcoming trip, busy yourself with work or other activities. There's all these anxiety symptom management things that you could do that would reduce your anxiety in a limited amount of time. But as soon as you started thinking about that trip again, boom, the anxiety would be right back.
Or even if somebody mentions a bear, you might not be cognitively aware that you are thinking about that and afraid of that, but your body may still respond with anxiety if somebody mentions something that even in some way remotely triggers your mind to know, hey, nervous system, pick it up. There's a fear. We're in danger. And so that's how we get in these situations of like, how is that even related to what I'm feeling right now? And if we don't take the time to slow down and get curious, we're often not going to find it because it just takes a little patience and stillness and waiting to allow our bodies the safety and the time to share with us what is actually going on.
So let's think about the potential consequences of just medicating anxiety or decreasing anxiety or avoiding things that are triggering anxiety versus getting curious about what's underneath that anxiety and addressing it. So in our little scenario, our little story here where we're talking about, a camping trip and bears and whatnot, our body in that scenario is alerting us to a real potential threat. There are bears, and we don't know what to do if we encounter one. In terms of Nick, we call that a gap, right? There's a gap in terms of practical knowledge. Like, I don't know what to do in the event of a bear attack. No one has ever taught me that. I've never had an experience that's educated me that. And now I'm facing a scenario where I think I might actually encounter this potentially life-threatening event, and I'm ill-equipped to navigate that. And so our brain and our nervous system is super smart in recognizing the potential threat that's there and is sounding that alarm around the scenario. But initially, we're just experiencing it as anxiety about this trip without really connecting and understanding the fear that's underneath that, right? And so if we just medicate the anxiety and put it out of our mind, be like, it's going to be fine, we're going to have fun, I'm going to think about all the good things that could come out of this trip. Like, I can manage the symptoms of the anxiety without getting curious and ever identifying the fear and the reason for the fear, which means then I don't take steps to address that fear. And what we could actually end up is being on this camping trip and being encountered with a bear and something bad actually happening because we didn't put our food in the right kind of cooler, because we didn't know, and that we didn't bring bear spray because we didn't know. And we're, all the time people kind of find themselves in bad situations like that out of just a gap in their knowledge, right? And the anxiety, if we had gotten curious about it, could lead us to that fear, and that fear could lead us then taking action, right? Because all emotion has an action tendency to it, and it can motivate us to then educate ourselves around bear safety, and then we actually are better equipped to navigate our life because our emotions have influenced us to take action that makes for a better outcome for our life and is a protective thing for our family and everybody else on the camping trip, right? So this is just a silly little example of, camping and a bear in the woods, right?
No, but I do think that the Holy Spirit uses the mechanisms that He wired into our body for our benefit. Like in this case, perhaps the Holy Spirit, God being omniscient, knowing everything ahead of time, is like, it will be important for you to know these pieces so that you can take action because you will encounter a bear. And so sometimes, like, could He communicate that a different way? He could, but maybe He doesn't choose to. Maybe He chooses to use a method of communication that He's already wired in.
Yeah, there's an email system that God's wired into the nervous system that He can communicate with us through. And if we're living under this false assumption that emotion is bad and we can't trust emotion and we should ignore it and kind of block it out, then we don't deal with the emotional things that are happening underneath that then trigger this anxiety and threat. And not only do we not benefit from the information that God has wired into our nervous system, but we are plagued by this sense of anxiety that detracts and takes away from our life. So we want to follow the anxiety, be curious about it, to what's lying underneath. Sometimes we'll find a emotion like fear or anger or sadness that's trying to tell us that we need to grieve or we need to take action. We might find joy underneath that. We might feel, any number of emotions that are looking for attention, that need us to engage and do something about it underneath that anxiety. Let's talk about a few other scenarios, what we might find underneath that. So in this case, there was a gap, right, with the bear. We could encounter a bear, and I don't know what to do if I encounter a bear, and so I have fear. And so the action, the wise action to take, informed by my emotions, is to educate myself and get bear spray and get a bear box to put our food in and lock it up and take those practical steps. At other times, we may find a wound that's underneath there. It could be, and they're not mutually exclusive. You can have wounds and gaps around the same sort of thing. But let's say we were going to chase that fear back, and instead of there being a gap that's there, maybe we have had somebody in our life that it had a bad experience in a outdoor kind of setting. Something unpredictable happened, a storm, someone died in a flash flood. Maybe there was an accident of some sort and they couldn't get to the hospital, or some loss that we experience in our life that is some way loosely connected with, say, the outdoors. And what we might find if we follow that anxiety is unresolved grief.
Yeah.
Around a loss that's getting triggered or activated by this scenario, right? It could be a season or experience in our life, maybe when we were younger, where we were in a camping type scenario and something bad happened, and we have a wound that's there, and these scenarios are reminiscent of that and bump into that old wound and bring it online. And that wound, whether it's unresolved grief or whether it's a time when we had something happen that shouldn't have happened and lacked what we needed to be regulated and organized around that experience. So there's an unresolved trauma, what we would call a wound, in that place. And the situation is activating that and bringing that part of ourself forward. And it's activating and bringing that part of ourself forward because God designed our nervous system to heal. And it coming forward creates the opportunity. It's that part of you saying, hey, I want to heal. Hey, there's something here that needs care and needs attention, right? And as we read 1 Peter, we say, God says, bring these things to me because I care for you, right? The response, God's response to these parts of ourself is care. Our response to this part of ourself should be care. In the community's response, the community that we're a part of, the response to these things is care. That's the antidote. That's what it is these parts need, is care. And so the anxiety becomes an indicator of an opportunity for healing to take place so that we can experience transformation around these things. So what does it take for that transformation to take place? Okay? We've talked about get regulated, because if we're dysregulated, the parts of the brain that we need in order to do this kind of internal work in healing go offline, and we're stuck in the cycle of anxiety because we're in this dysregulated place, and that can lead to all sorts of problematic behavior and choices that are unhelpful. So we got to regulate that, but regulation isn't enough. We have to get curious and follow those feelings back to their origin. What is it that's pushing the panic button? What is it that's pushing the anxiety smoke alarm button, creating that sympathetic nervous system activation? But insight alone isn't curative. Like understanding that I think I'm afraid I might get eaten by a bear. That's good insight. That's good a dot to connect in that and recognize that. But that in of itself doesn't address the fear. Connecting it back and going, oh man, when I think about this trip, it causes me to think about Daniel. And I still, and I get teary and I sadness. There's this unresolved grief, Connecting that dot is great insight, but it doesn't resolve the grief that's there. That, connecting that dot back to, oh my gosh, I think I go back to, and I keep thinking about when I was 8 years old and was on a scouting trip and I got disconnected from the group and I was so scared. I was so scared of what was going to happen and nobody was around. I couldn't find them. Turns out they were just on the other side of the hill, but I didn't know that. And I was terrified. I was going to die. And that they'd never find me. I'd get eaten by a bear or something bad would happen to me. And there's this traumatic experience that we had that we were dysregulated and disorganized and never got help. Well, it's great to connect the dot that happened, but connecting the dot at insight in itself doesn't actually resolve that trauma that was there. Right? And so knowing back here, and this is where a lot of therapeutic models fall short, because a lot of therapeutic models stop at insight. And they assume that just because you have insight, oh, now I better understand myself, then that means that it's going to solve or resolve those things.
And it does help.
Yeah, organizing and having better understanding helps regulate the nervous system. Totally does help. There's totally benefit from it. But it doesn't heal the wound and it doesn't fill the gap that's there. What's required are experiences that transform those things. So what does that mean? So we're talking about get regulated, get curious, and curiosity leads to that insight and that understanding. The third thing is to get help. What is the help that each situation needs for it to heal? In the first scenario, where there was a gap and I don't know what to do if I encounter a bear, well, we need help in the form of somebody who knows what to do in the event you encounter a bear and how to navigate that, right? We need help from somebody. We need somebody that has something we don't have. In this case, information about what to do to avoid contact with a bear preventatively and what to do in the event that we do have contact with a bear, right? So we need a sage. We talk about iron sharpeners and we talk about sage circle. A sage is somebody who is more mature than you in some domain, right? And so a sage in this situation would be somebody that knows more about the woods and knows more about bears than you. It may be a sage that you find through YouTube. Right. It may be a sage that you find through the local ranger station. It may be a sage that you find in your community of somebody who does a lot of camping and hunting and, that you can ask questions. But in this area, they have more knowledge and understanding, more maturity in this domain than you. And you can draw on that sage to fill in that gap for you so you no longer have to be afraid of it. Like that gap is filled and it relieves the fear because it's like, oh, now I know what to do. I know what equipment I need. I know how to avoid a situation and I know what to do if I were to encounter one. So I still don't want to, yes, but I'm not terrified anymore, yes, of it because I know what to do in that situation.
And it takes it from almost intolerable potentially to tolerable. Like I would still be freaked out if I encountered a bear. Encountered a bear. But if I had prepared and I had a sense of what to know to do and what was going on, I would feel a lot better.
Yeah, and you could still enjoy a trip with your family.
Yeah.
Because what happens is if that fear unaddressed then creates limits in your life. And you may be so overwhelmed that you can't take this trip with your family and miss out on the memories and miss out on the opportunity. And your life gets narrower because of this gap.
Yeah.
Whereas having addressed that gap, the fear is relieved and I'm freed up to enjoy my life.
Yeah.
I can go on this trip and make memories with my kids and my spouse, and I can enjoy and be fully present instead of consumed with fear and anxiety the whole time that I'm there. Like I'm able to be alive more. You know, Jesus talks about this abundant life, the fullness of life. He's not just talking about the afterlife. He's talking about healing and wholeness he wants us to have in this life that empowers us to enjoy the fullness of what this life has to offer us in him.
Yeah.
So that scenario, we're addressing a gap there. Maybe it's this wound, right, of unresolved grief. Like we've regulated our nervous system. We've gotten curious and we followed that curiosity and it's led us to insight and understanding about and connecting the dots with this unresolved grief that I have around this loss that I experienced in my life. Now I need help. What kind of help do I need? Well, grief needs to be shared and held with others, right? And so I need to be able to process through the loss that I experience in that situation, which maybe means reaching out to my friends from that season. Maybe it means reaching out to others who also knew that person.
Yeah.
And sharing with them, I got this upcoming trip.
Yeah.
And it's really reminding me of Daniel. And yeah, I just find myself so sad. You know, I realize that there's still loss there that is heavy for me.
Yeah.
And that I haven't moved through. And I just need to share that with somebody. I need to honor that. And maybe it means writing a grief letter to Daniel and being like, man, I miss you. You know, I can't believe it's been so many years already, but I still miss you in this. And we're working through the grief in order to allow that wound to heal and that unresolved grief to be dealt with, which brings wholeness to us and vitality in life on the other side. Maybe we get curious and we follow this back and we find that traumatic memory from 8 years old and feeling abandoned and scared to death that I'm going to die in the woods. What do we need in that? Well, what trauma needs to resolve is we need safety, we need regulation, we need organization. Maybe we can find that in processing it with a friend. Maybe we need to connect with a counselor, a therapist around that. And we have to move past the shame of like, oh, it's so silly. I was 8 years old and they were just on the other side of the hill. I wasn't really in danger.
That is such a temptation that we face that keeps us in anxiety, that keeps us shackled to these old wounds that are never going to heal until we give that younger part of us the safety it needed.
Yeah, we feel shame around it and it causes us to hide and invalidate them. Like, it's so silly. I know the truth about that situation, that I wasn't really in a life-threatening, but at the time you didn't know.
Yes. And that part is still in your body. Like that sense of it, God allowed it to stay in your body so that when the opportunity came, you could go back and provide that safety and organization and regulation so that it could truly heal, so that it would be updated, and then you won't have that grief and sadness and fear that accidentally informs you as an adult and makes it limit your life.
Yeah. We'll unpack in a future episode kind of how trauma works and what trauma does. But for now, when our nervous system feels dysregulated and disorganized, that is, we are afraid for our life, so our sympathetic nervous system is activated, and this front part of our brain that helps us organize experience goes offline, and we don't have anybody else with us to help us regulate and to organize what's happening, then our body goes into this emergency mode where it contains that experience and dissociates us from it so that it doesn't destroy us. We don't get overwhelmed and just die and collapse. And so it's this protective mechanism that goes in place. But part of that protective mechanism means that that experience stays encapsulated in our nervous system in the same state that it was formed. And so while we move on and grow up, that memory stays encapsulated in this place. And so we look back on that experience through our adult lens and we're like, I later found out they were just over the hill. It was no big deal. I wasn't in real danger. I wasn't going to die. It's so silly. Why would that bill still be bothering me? All those kinds of thoughts. But at the time of that experience, when it encapsulated, we didn't know those things. And we didn't know we weren't going to die.
Yeah.
We didn't know that we were going to, not be lost in the woods forever. Like, it was overwhelming, and it triggered that safety survival response within our nervous system. And that has to be unpacked, meaning that it has to be brought back online, and it has to, in a regulated and safe context, then it has to be organized and updated with the information that we now know about that situation. It's a process called memory reconsolidation, and it uses mechanisms that are Jesus wired into our nervous system to allow for the healing of those things. So the mechanisms are there because God wired them into the nervous system for our benefit, but we have to use those mechanisms in order to bring about healing to those things. And ironically, anxiety becomes a pathway and a gateway to having those experiences. Like, we want to just, because it's annoying, the symptoms, to just get rid of them.
Emotions, inconvenient. They can be so inconvenient.
Yeah, and so we can be like, how do I just make this anxiety go away? But there's an invitation and a gift for us in that anxiety, and that it can lead us. It's drawing our attention back. It has a message for us, has a signal for us that there's something that needs our care, that when we listen to it and get curious about it, we can find our way back to that, and we can provide the care that's needed to bring healing and wholeness, heal the wounds, fill in the gaps, that then mature us into our true self and enable us to experience the true happiness, the abundant life that Jesus wants for us.
Yeah. When I think about this biblical imagery of refining metal in fire, and thinking about God pulling out the impurities, and this is one of the practical, tangible, like, if you think about something in fire, that's not pleasant. That doesn't feel good. Or even like a gardener pruning their, whatever, gardener's garden, not me. But like this idea of cutting away what's dead, what doesn't produce fruit, what doesn't make the entire plant alive and thriving and beautiful, that's not pleasant work. And yet it is a way that our God has chose to show up in creation with his created things. And so, sometimes I think we can think, I have anxiety and I'm failing and I'm not doing a good job. And actually, I think often it's just this natural, designed by God piece of like, no, this is how I'm pruning your life. This is how I'm making you, cutting away the things that are not the true you, cutting away the things that are keeping you from all the joy and all the abundance and all the freedom and all the delight I have for you.
Yeah. And Nick, we talk about the false self that's a product of the wounds and the gaps that are part of our story and does not, experience true happiness and the fullness of what God has for us. And that as our wounds heal and our gaps fill, that it actually matures and brings forward our true self and gives us the capacities to really enjoy life and have happiness in the abundant life kind of way that Jesus wants for us. And so being curious about our anxiety becomes a pathway for that to happen. Hey friend, thanks for hanging out with us. If you've learned something, please subscribe and share it with somebody you love. You'll probably also like some of the other videos that we have, and so we'll link to those around here. Check them out and we'll keep learning together. And remember, Jesus wants you to live an abundant life, to mature into your true self, like the version of you that he created you to be and that he wants you to mature into, so that you can experience true happiness in him, a life characterized by peace, joy, and hope. And we're here cheering you on as you mature into your true self and experience true happiness. We love you, and we'll see you down the road.